It was a city suspended between continents, where mists from the Bosporus mingled with the scent of incense, and time seemed to move to a different rhythm. For over 1,000 years, it stood as a beacon of splendor and survival. Its walls repelled armies, its domes shimmered like dreams. And within its libraries, markets, and sanctuaries, the very memory of the ancient world found refuge. This is the story of Byzantium, an empire of golden mosaics, whispered secrets, and unwavering endurance. Before we begin, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. It's somewhat comforting to imagine all of us, scattered across the globe, quietly unwinding together. So, breathe deeply, settle in, and allow the mysteries of time and space to cradle your imagination. For in the quiet hours of the night, under the same stars watched by our ancestors, the secrets of long-lost civilizations await, patiently, quietly, like ancient stars still shining from light years away. Let's begin. The night air is cool as it drifts over the gentle waters of the Bosporus, carrying the scent of brine, distant smoke, and something more elusive: history itself. You find yourself standing near the harbour as soft waves roll over stone quays, worn smooth by centuries of footsteps and mooring ropes. The stars shimmer above you, reflected in the still surface of the sea like ancient lanterns suspended in time. On one side lies the continent of Europe, and on the other, Asia. Between them rests a city that listens to both, cradled in the arms of land and sea, breathing with the rhythm of two worlds. Its name is Byzantium, and even in its earliest hours, it whispered of eternity. The story of Byzantium begins not with golden domes or resplendent emperors, but with a group of Greek settlers from the city of Megara, who arrived on these shores in 657 BC. Led by a man named Byzas, they sought a new beginning, and in this small sliver of land, surrounded by water on three sides, and perched on the edge of vast empires, they saw promise. The location was no accident. It was chosen for its strategic perfection, where the deep natural harbour of the Golden Horn met the currents of commerce and conflict. Ships from the Black Sea passed through the narrow strait. Traders brought spices, grain, and silk, and the winds carried both whispers of opportunity and the cries of coming storms. The city was a sentinel between continents, a place of endless potential. In its earliest centuries, Byzantium was a modest settlement, a place of fishermen, sailors, and merchants, where the clink of amphorae echoed through the narrow streets and marketplaces. The buildings were humble, but the sight was priceless. Over time, the city was drawn into the broader currents of the ancient world. It fell under Persian control, then joined the Athenian League, and later saw Roman oversight. Yet, even as empires shifted like sand dunes around it, Byzantium endured. It was too valuable, too well placed to be ignored. The great powers might come and go, but Byzantium remained, quiet and watchful, guarding the narrow straits where two seas met. By the 3rd century AD, the Roman Empire was in disarray. Plagues swept through its cities, borders crumbled beneath barbarian pressure, and civil wars tore the imperial fabric. Amid this chaos, Byzantium's importance grew more obvious. It was defensible, distant from the volatile politics of Rome, and close to the rich eastern provinces. Generals, emperors, and visionaries began to take notice. The city had never been Rome, but perhaps in time it could become something greater. Though the streets of Byzantium remained quiet and provincial, something deeper was stirring beneath its stones. The city was not yet beautiful in the ways it would one day be. There were no soaring domes or monumental churches, no cascading mosaics or jeweled icons, but the foundations were being laid, quite literally, for a transformation that would change the course of history. The waters of the Bosporus lapped at its shores with quiet determination, as if patiently waiting for the city to awaken. And then, in the early years of the 4th century, destiny arrived in the form of a man whose vision would reshape not just the city, but the entire ancient world. His name was Constantine. And though he was not born in Byzantium, he would become its architect, its patron, and the one who saw in its winding streets and hilltop vantage points the seeds of a new imperial dream. Before Constantine, the city was merely a promising outpost. After him, it would become a second Rome, and eventually something even more enduring. He saw what others had overlooked, that Byzantium's location made it the perfect stage for a new chapter of empire, far from the fading grandeur and creeping decadence of old Rome. Here, he envisioned a capital infused with divine purpose, where East and West could be reconciled, and where a new kind of empire could be born. But that transformation, while real and profound, would not erase the city's origins. Even as it grew into Constantinople, even as palaces and forums replaced its humble homes, the soul of Byzantium remained. You can feel it in the breeze that moves through the cypress trees, in the sound of lapping water beneath the walls, and in the quiet dignity of its enduring name. Imagine now, as you close your eyes, the sound of distant bells tolling in the darkness. Picture the silhouette of a watchman on the sea wall, his torch flickering in the cool breeze. He gazes out over the water, unaware of the history waiting just beyond the horizon. He does not know that emperors will ride through these gates, that armies will lay siege to them, that sacred relics will be hidden here, and that centuries from now, the city he walks will still be remembered, not just as a place, but as a symbol. All he knows is the quiet rhythm of the waves and the soft hum of the wind as it sings through the streets of Byzantium. And so, in the gentle dark, the city rests, not yet an empire, not yet eternal, but already something rare, a city between two worlds, waiting for its time to come. The morning light stretches softly over the rolling waters of the Golden Horn. A fine mist hangs above the surface, gently diffusing the pale golden glow. Gulls drift in lazy circles above merchant boats, their wings barely stirring the air. Somewhere in the distance a bell tolls, low and slow, calling the city to wake. Along the shore, the silhouettes of fishermen move in silence, casting their nets into ancient currents. It is the early 4th century, and something is stirring in the stillness. Byzantium, a city that once merely observed history, now finds itself at its very center. And the man drawing the threads together is Constantine. Born around 272 AD in the Roman province of Moesia, Constantine was a child of contradictions. His father, Constantius, was a high-ranking Roman military officer. His mother, Helena, came from humbler roots, a woman of deep Christian faith, whose quiet influence would shape not only her son's heart, but the spiritual course of an empire. Constantine's early years were spent in imperial courts, among generals and governors, learning the politics of survival and the rhetoric of ambition. He was raised in a world of crumbling borders, internal strife, and deep uncertainty. The Roman Empire, once invincible, was fragmenting like dry parchment, and no one could say whether it would endure. In 306, following his father's death, Constantine was proclaimed emperor by his troops in the city of Eboracum, modern-day York. The gesture was bold, the claim contested. What followed was a long and perilous struggle for legitimacy, as Constantine battled rival claimants across the empire. There were moments when everything seemed uncertain: civil wars, strategic betrayals, desperate alliances. But Constantine possessed a rare combination of military prowess and political insight. He understood that power did not lie only in legions and swords, but also in symbols, in belief, in the minds of the people. One night in 312, as Constantine prepared to face his rival Maxentius at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, he reportedly beheld a vision. It is said that he saw a cross of light in the sky, inscribed with the words, "In this sign, conquer." Whether the vision was divine or strategic, Constantine took it to heart. He ordered the Christian symbol to be painted on the shields of his soldiers and marched into battle. The victory was decisive. From that moment forward, Constantine aligned himself with the Christian faith, though his understanding of it and his reasons for embracing it were complex. In 313, he issued the Edict of Milan, granting official tolerance to Christianity throughout the empire. For a religion that had been persecuted, its followers martyred in public squares and underground catacombs, this was a revolution. The Christian world emerged into daylight. Churches were constructed with imperial funds. Bishops gained access to imperial courts. For the first time, Christianity and Roman governance were intertwined, a bond that would grow ever stronger in the centuries to come. Yet Constantine's transformation was not solely spiritual. He looked beyond Rome for the future of his empire. The old capital, for all its glory, was now burdened by its own weight, politically unstable, economically strained, and too exposed to the chaos of the western frontiers. Constantine envisioned something new. He turned his eyes eastward, to the ancient city of Byzantium, perched perfectly between continents, gazing out over the waters of trade and conquest. He saw in it not just a city, but a canvas. From 324 onward, he began the Great Transformation. Byzantium became a vast construction site. Walls expanded, aqueducts restored, temples and forums rising from the dust. Artisans, engineers, and architects from across the empire were summoned. Pagan monuments were rededicated. Churches were raised. The city was adorned with relics and symbols of Christian authority, even as it retained its classical grandeur. In 330, Constantine formally inaugurated the city as his new capital. It would be called Constantinople, the city of Constantine. Yet in every stone, the echoes of Byzantium remained. Constantinople was a marvel. Built on 7 hills like Rome itself, it quickly became a fusion of East and West, tradition and innovation. Greek became the common tongue. Roman law shaped governance. Christianity guided the soul of the city. Markets brimmed with silks, spices, and silver. Schools and libraries thrived. It was a place where senators strolled colonnaded avenues and monks lit candles beneath the golden icons of chapels. From this city, Constantine ruled, not just as a sovereign, but as the architect of a new world. His involvement in church affairs was profound. In 325, he convened the First Council of Nicaea, gathering bishops from across the Christian world to resolve disputes that threatened unity. The outcome was the Nicene Creed, a foundational statement of belief that still echoes through cathedrals and chapels today. Though Constantine himself was not baptized until shortly before his death, his influence on Christianity was incalculable. He reshaped its future. He gave it form, legitimacy, and permanence. But like all rulers, Constantine's legacy was not without blemish. His reign bore the marks of authoritarianism. Political rivals were suppressed or executed, including his own son Crispus and his wife Fausta, under mysterious and tragic circumstances. His empire was still an empire, driven by power and control, gilded by faith. Yet for all the shadows, Constantine's vision endured. He left behind a capital that would stand for over 1,000 years, weathering storms that Rome itself could not. When he died in 337, Constantine was buried in the Church of the Holy Apostles, not alone, but surrounded by 12 empty sarcophagi, each meant to represent an apostle. It was as if he saw himself as the 13th, the emperor apostle, who guided the faith not only with words, but with walls and cities and law. And now, as dusk returns to the hills of Constantinople, the warm orange light spills across the marble of old forums and the rooftops of distant churches. You can almost hear the low chant of prayers rising from a candlelit nave, the soft shuffle of sandals across ancient courtyards. Constantine is long gone, but his city breathes still, poised between heaven and earth, empire and faith. Beneath the stars, the dream he built continues to glow, quietly eternal. A warm breeze dances across the stones of the hippodrome. Dust hangs in the sunlight like gold leaf, stirred by the hoofbeats of chariot horses charging across the vast arena. Thousands of voices rise and fall like waves, their roars echoing against marble seats and colonnaded walls. You stand amidst the pageantry of Byzantium in its prime, a city not only of power and prayer, but of passion, sport, and spectacle. And amid the grandeur of this moment, your gaze drifts upward to the imperial box where a woman watches the race unfold. Her expression is unreadable, poised and commanding. This is Theodora, Empress of Byzantium, once a performer beneath this very sky, now sovereign over the empire's heart. She was born not to silk or crowns, but to hardship. Around the year 500, in a modest home near the circus grounds, Theodora entered a world defined by survival. Her father, a bearkeeper for the hippodrome, died when she was still a child. Her mother, seeking to secure work for the family, petitioned the circus factions for support. It was the beginning of a life lived on the margins, among performers, acrobats, and the chorus of the crowd. As a girl, Theodora appeared on the same hippodrome sands where nobles and commoners gathered, acting in comedic sketches and dramatic pantomimes, playing roles that entertained but rarely earned respect. The lines between art and exploitation were blurred, and for many years, Theodora lived in a world that saw her more as spectacle than citizen. But behind the glitter of the stage lights and the echo of applause, there was a mind observing, learning, adapting, waiting. Her life changed when she left Constantinople, traveling east to the city of Alexandria. There, far from the roar of the capital, she lived quietly and experienced a profound personal transformation. She encountered Christian teachings in a new light, ones that emphasized redemption, dignity, and justice. The city softened her, but it also sharpened her resolve. Upon returning to Constantinople, she settled into a more modest life as a spinner of wool. And it was during this unassuming chapter that she met Justinian, the ambitious heir to the imperial throne. He was captivated not only by her beauty, but by her wit and clarity of thought. Their bond defied convention. She, an actress with a scandalous past, he, destined for rule. But Justinian saw in her a partner, an equal in vision and strength. In 525, he defied tradition and married her. 2 years later, he was crowned emperor, and Theodora became Empress of the Byzantine world. Their reign would become one of the most significant in imperial history. Theodora was not content to be a decorative presence at court. She engaged in statecraft, advised Justinian on religious controversies, and shaped legal reforms that protected the vulnerable. She championed the rights of women, expanded protections for actresses, granted greater freedom to divorce for abused wives, and funded safe houses for those seeking refuge. Her empathy was hard-earned. shaped by the struggles of her youth, and it forged in her a sense of justice that stretched far beyond palace walls. The most pivotal moment of her life came in January of 532. The city, restless with discontent, erupted in rebellion during a series of chariot races at the Hippodrome. The Blues and the Greens, the two rival racing factions, had long held sway in the city, commanding the loyalty of thousands. What began as a protest over arrests soon exploded into the Nika riots, one of the most violent uprisings in Constantinople's history. Fires raged through the streets, public buildings were looted, the Hagia Sophia was set ablaze. The people called for Justinian's removal, and much of the court urged him to flee, to abandon the capital, the throne, and all that had been built. But Theodora stood firm. In a quiet chamber within the palace, she addressed the emperor and his advisors with unwavering calm. Her words would become legend. "Royalty is a fine burial shroud," she said. She would rather die an empress than live in exile. Her courage rekindled Justinian's resolve. The decision was made. He summoned his generals, most notably the brilliant Belisarius, and struck back. In a brutal crackdown within the Hippodrome, imperial troops slaughtered thousands. The uprising ended not with compromise, but with blood and fire. In the aftermath, Theodora and Justinian set about rebuilding the city with astonishing speed and grandeur. The fires that had blackened Constantinople became the crucible for its rebirth, and Theodora, once mocked and marginalized, stood tall as a symbol of resilience. Her influence endured in the laws Justinian codified, in the architectural wonders he commissioned, and in the spirit of a city that had looked into the abyss and survived. She died in 548, likely of cancer after 2 decades as empress. Justinian mourned her deeply. Though their rule was not without controversy, their partnership reshaped Byzantium. In Ravenna, far from the capital, a mosaic in the church of San Vitale captures her likeness. Robed in imperial purple, haloed, serene, eyes gazing out with timeless composure. It is a portrait not just of an empress, but of a woman who rose from the dust of the circus to the heights of empire. Now, as the evening shadows settle over the empty hippodrome, where grass creeps between cracked stones and the roar of the crowd is long gone, you might still feel her presence, not in the echoes of power, but in the quiet courage of a life transformed. Theodora remains, in golden glass and memory, a testament to how even the most unlikely among us can change the world. As the soft light of dawn rises over Constantinople, it brushes gently against rooftops and stone-paved lanes, spilling like honey down the city's 7 hills. The mists retreat across the Bosporus, and above the morning haze, domes rise into the sky like polished gems. From every direction, the city glitters, not in opulence for its own sake, but with intention, with reverence, with purpose. For here, architecture is not just structure, it is theology in stone. It is the language through which Byzantium tells its story to heaven and earth. The skyline gleamed like a crown, adorned with spires and minarets, with arches that bent like whispers of the divine. Markets stirred below, but the eye was always drawn upward, to the heavens, to the domes. At the very heart of this celestial city stood its most iconic wonder, the Hagia Sophia, the Church of Holy Wisdom. Born of destruction and defiance, it rose from the ashes of the Nika riots, like a phoenix clad in marble and gold. Commissioned by Emperor Justinian as both a triumph and a tribute, the Hagia Sophia was not just a church, but a declaration. Construction began in 532 and was completed in a breathtaking 5 years, a feat so ambitious that it seemed guided by divine hands. From the moment you stepped inside, the vastness overwhelmed you. A dome, 100 feet wide and suspended over 180 feet above the floor, seemed to float without weight. Light poured in from hidden windows around its base, creating the illusion that the heavens had cracked open. Mosaics shimmered on every surface, their golden tesserae reflecting the flickering glow of oil lamps and candles. The scent of incense drifted through the nave, mingling with the smell of stone, wax, and myrrh. The architects, Anthemus of Tralles and Isidore of Miletus, brought together the mathematical brilliance of classical antiquity with bold innovations that defied architectural tradition. They used pendentives, curved triangular segments, to transition the square base of the church into its soaring circular dome. It was a synthesis of science, art, and spirituality, a space meant to lift not just the eye, but the soul. But the Hagia Sophia was only one jewel in the city's diadem. The city itself had become a living mosaic of sacred and secular splendor. Stretching more than 4 miles from the Sea of Marmara to the Golden Horn, the Theodosian walls were masterpieces of military engineering. Built in the 5th century under Emperor Theodosius II, they formed 3 concentric layers of defense: a moat, an outer wall, and a massive inner wall. Each layer was fortified with towers, battlements, and hidden posterns, designed to withstand siege engines, arrows, fire, and time itself. These walls would protect the city for over 1,000 years, standing against countless invasions and only falling to the Ottomans in 1453. Within those walls, the rhythm of Byzantine life flowed through spaces both grand and humble. Fountains gurgled in sunlit courtyards. Marble cisterns beneath the city stored millions of gallons of water, brought in by aqueducts that arced across the valleys like ribbons of stone. The Basilica cistern, with its forest of 336 columns and gentle waters, seemed like a subterranean palace of quiet reflection. Above ground, the Forum of Constantine, the Augustan Square, and the Forum of Theodosius provided places for gathering, commerce, and ceremony. The Hippodrome, too, was a centerpiece of civic life, not only for sport, but for politics, theatre, and communal identity. Here, thousands gathered beneath imperial balconies to cheer on charioteers and to voice their hopes or grievances. Adjacent to the Great Palace, it formed part of a tapestry of spaces where emperor and citizen could share a fleeting moment in the same breath of air. The Great Palace itself, sprawling and intricate, was a labyrinth of halls, chapels, and gardens. Mosaics lined its corridors, depicting scenes of daily life and imperial glory. Hunters, musicians, grapevines, and dancers frozen in golden motion. In one wing stood the Chalk Gate, the grand ceremonial entrance to the palace, its doors flanked by monumental images of Christ and the Emperor, symbolizing the unity of sacred and secular power. Architecture in Byzantium was always more than shelter. It was an expression of cosmic order. Churches were designed to echo the divine, their proportions carefully calculated, their light carefully orchestrated. Domes represented the vault of heaven. Windows bathed interiors in soft illumination, creating spaces that seemed to breathe with spirit. Mosaics and icons told sacred stories, their colors vivid, their eyes watchful. Even the smallest chapel was constructed with reverence. Every surface spoke of eternity. And yet, this devotion to beauty extended beyond churches and palaces. Public baths, open to all citizens, were places of cleansing and community. Porticos provided shade for scholars and students. Markets were designed not only for trade, but for gathering, a sense of shared life woven into stone. Byzantine architecture taught that beauty could elevate the soul. To build was not simply to construct, but to participate in the divine act of creation. Builders were not mere labourers. They were artists, theologians, dreamers. Now, as twilight deepens and the lamps are lit, the outlines of the city soften against the darkening sky. The dome of the Hagia Sophia still gleams faintly, a golden echo of the sun. Through an open window, the sound of a choir drifts into the air, slow and resonant. The chant is ancient, its syllables shaped by centuries. As you walk slowly through the quiet streets, past ancient stones still warm from the day, you understand, this city was built not just to endure, but to inspire. In every arch, every column, every dome, Byzantium reaches towards something greater, a glimpse of heaven, here on earth. As the sun climbs slowly above the city, the streets of Constantinople stir to life with 1,000 murmurs and scents. You find yourself walking through the heart of the capital, where every corner offers something rare and remarkable. The Grand Bazaar is unfurling like a painted scroll. Merchants lift wooden shutters, revealing baskets of saffron and cinnamon, bolts of silk dyed in brilliant hues, jars of honey and amber, and silver trinkets that catch the morning light. There is movement everywhere, a rustle of cloth, the clink of coins, the laughter of children chasing stray pigeons. This is not just a marketplace. It is Byzantium's heartbeat, a living tapestry woven with the threads of countless civilizations. Here, goods arrive from every corner of the known world. From the east come caravans bearing silk from China, their journeys stretching across deserts and mountains, guided by the stars and guarded by tradition. Spices from India, fragrant and potent, arrive in intricately carved boxes. From the north, merchants bring furs and wax, amber and timber, sailing down great rivers and through the Black Sea. Ships unload amphorae of oil and wine from the Aegean, jars of olives from Syria, and finely painted ceramics from the coasts of Africa. All paths lead here, to Constantinople, the emporium of the medieval world, where East and West meet in a glorious exchange of goods, ideas, and beliefs. But trade in Byzantium was never only about wealth. With the exchange of spices and silks came words, customs, and philosophies. Constantinople was a city where dozens of languages filled the air. Greek and Latin, certainly, but also Armenian, Coptic, Arabic, Persian, and Slavic dialects. At the harbour, sailors might sing in tongues unfamiliar to the capital's elite, while scholars debated in arcaded halls about Aristotle, medicine, or the movement of the stars. The intellectual life of the city pulsed quietly but steadily beneath the marble facades. Byzantium preserved the wisdom of the ancient world at a time when much of Europe teetered on the edge of forgetting. Monasteries and scriptoriums dotted the empire, their monks bent over vellum pages, carefully copying the texts of Plato, Euclid, Galen, and Homer. Candlelight flickered over the ink-stained hands of scribes, each letter formed with reverence. In their quiet devotion, they guarded a bridge between past and future, ensuring that the knowledge of antiquity would not be lost to dust. The University of Constantinople, founded in the 5th century, continued to educate generations in the liberal arts, theology, and law. Instruction blended Roman tradition with Christian insight, and students engaged with both scripture and science. The city's libraries, vast and treasured, became vaults of memory. Though fires and invasions would threaten them through the centuries, many of their contents found their way into later Arabic, Latin, and Renaissance texts, their ideas carried forward like seeds on the wind. But knowledge was not confined to the halls of scholars. Religion permeated every aspect of daily life, and faith was inseparable from learning. Churches served as both houses of worship and centers of community life. Monasteries healed the sick, fed the hungry, and offered education to children. Icons, sacred images painted with solemn care on wooden panels, adorned every chapel, every home, every market stall. They were more than art, they were theology made visible, windows into the divine. The faithful would light candles before them, whisper prayers, and gaze into the eternal stillness of saintly faces that seemed to watch and understand. Culturally, Byzantium was a mirror of its surroundings, but always with its own distinct reflection. Persian textiles influenced clothing. Arabic instruments introduced new sounds into Byzantine music. Viking bodyguards of the emperor, known as the Varangian Guard, brought northern languages and traditions into the heart of the palace. Slavic and Armenian artisans contributed to architecture and craftsmanship. Byzantium absorbed all and transformed it, creating a unique cultural language that was neither purely Roman nor Eastern, but something rich and singular, both cosmopolitan and sacred. Even the rituals of court life were steeped in a blend of theatre and theology. The emperor, seated beneath a golden canopy, surrounded by jeweled curtains and perfumed attendants, appeared less as a mortal ruler than as an icon himself, a living symbol of divine order on earth. Every movement, every procession, was choreographed with meaning, echoing celestial harmony. At religious festivals, relics of saints were carried through the streets, veiled women and barefoot children joining in solemn reverence. Incense filled the air, mingling with the sound of hymns in ancient Greek, and for a moment, the boundary between heaven and earth seemed to vanish. And yet, beyond the pomp and pageantry, life moved with quieter rhythms too. In the artisans' quarters, potters turned clay with steady hands. In bakeries, round loaves of sesame bread cooled on wooden shelves. Fishermen rose before dawn to cast their nets into the sea, their songs blending with the cries of gulls. In shaded courtyards, elders taught children to read, sounding out syllables over wax tablets. The empire's greatness did not reside only in its ceremonies or palaces, but in these small moments, where faith, work, and family wove together to form the durable cloth of society. Now, as twilight settles over the city, the market stalls begin to close. Merchants cover their wares with linen cloths. The scent of grilled fish and honey pastries wafts from doorways. The musicians by the fountain tune their lutes one last time before packing them away. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolls softly, calling the faithful to vespers. The city exhales, the noise, the movement, the breathless energy of day giving way to peace. And in that hush, Constantinople reveals itself not only as a place of wealth or wisdom, but as a sanctuary of spirit, where silk and scripture flow side by side, binding together the world in threads of gold and words of grace. A hush has fallen over the great city. The marble streets of Constantinople, once alive with the sound of trade and laughter, lie unnervingly still. The breeze carries not the scent of roasted spices or sea salt, but something heavier, the scent of smoke, of incense and of sorrow. Doors are shut, windows shuttered. Along narrow lanes that once rang with the clatter of hooves and the laughter of children, only a few cloaked figures move silently, heads bowed. The year is 541, and an invisible shadow has wrapped itself around the empire. The Plague of Justinian has arrived. It began subtly, like a whisper on the wind, a sailor feverish in the harbour, a cough in the marketplace, a servant who failed to rise in the morning. Then, within weeks, the disease bloomed across the city with terrifying speed. Fevers surged, Chills rattled once strong bodies. Swellings appeared, dark, painful lumps beneath the arms and behind the ears. And soon, death came, swiftly, silently, relentlessly. Carried by fleas on rats that arrived on grain ships from Egypt, the plague was merciless. The bustling metropolis, home to perhaps 500,000 souls, found itself under siege not by armies, but by something unseen. Bodies began to pile up in courtyards. Graves overflowed. Families sealed their doors in fear. Priests moved cautiously through alleys, administering last rites to the dying with trembling hands. Even the great bathhouses, normally brimming with warmth and conversation, fell quiet. The empire's beating heart had slowed. Emperor Justinian himself fell ill, his robust frame weakened by fever and delirium. For weeks, his court was paralyzed, awaiting either recovery or succession. Miraculously, he survived, but the empire he awoke to was changed. It is said that nearly half the population of Constantinople perished. In some provinces, entire villages disappeared. Grain fields lay untended, trade routes silent. Armies shrank. Ships remained moored. It felt to many as if the end had come. And yet, in the depth of despair, something deeper stirred. The church, already central to daily life, became an anchor amid the storm. Monasteries opened their gates, tending to the sick and the orphaned, feeding the hungry, praying with the grieving. Clergy, though exhausted and afraid, offered comfort with every sacrament, every whispered verse. In this time of darkness, faith became not just a source of hope, but a structure for survival. The theology of the empire began to evolve. Before the plague, Christianity in Byzantium had often worn the robes of imperial triumph. It was the faith of emperors and grand cathedrals, of processions and declarations. But in the silence of plague-stricken homes and the flickering light of solitary candles, the tone shifted. People began to speak more softly of suffering, of humility, of the shortness of life and the promise of the world to come. This introspection found its way into art and song. Icons, once radiant with glory, now appeared more meditative. The eyes of saints grew more sorrowful, their expressions tempered with quiet compassion. Hymns took on a darker hue, melodic and gentle, but tinged with longing. Monks composed verses about exile and redemption, not just from lands, but from the safety of health and routine. The city's spiritual heart began to beat more slowly, more deeply, more humanly. In the years that followed, Constantinople did not crumble. It mourned, but it endured. Slowly, life returned. Markets reopened. Ships returned to sea. Families gathered once more to light lamps in memory of the lost. The empire, though scarred, did not break. In fact, it would go on to rise again in strength, building monuments, passing laws, and extending its reach. The plague had passed, but its memory remained, etched not just in history, but in the soul of Byzantium. In its wake, many came to see the empire differently. No longer just a bastion of grandeur and gold, it became a place of endurance, of quiet strength. The people who surveyed had lived through something indescribable. They had buried their loved ones, walked empty streets, and prayed not for prosperity, but for breath. And somehow they had carried on. And so, as the sun dips below the horizon and shadows stretch across the quiet city, you might imagine a small chapel tucked between two alleys. Inside, a single candle burns on a stone ledge. The flame wavers slightly in the still air, casting soft light on the face of a painted saint. The room is silent, save for the gentle creak of wood, the whisper of a prayer. Outside, the streets are not empty. They are quieter, yes, more reverent, more aware of the fragility of life. But they pulse again with movement. The bells toll. The bread is baked. A mother sings softly to her child, and the city breathes once more. The Plague of Justinian was not the end of Byzantium. It was a crucible. In fire and loss, the empire's identity was reshaped, no longer merely imperial, but deeply human. Faith became deeper, art became more tender. The cross, once a symbol of triumph, now also bore witness to suffering. And from this understanding, a new strength emerged. In the gentle dark, Constantinople holds its silence, not out of fear, but out of memory. And in that silence lies the promise that even in sorrow, life continues, gently, quietly, faithfully. In a quiet chapel tucked behind the stone walls of a monastery, the soft glow of candlelight flickers gently on the face of an icon. Dust hangs in the still air, swirling slowly in a shaft of light that filters through a narrow window. Before you stands an image, not just of a man, but of something more. It is Christ, serene and solemn, eyes filled with mystery and compassion. The gold leaf surrounding his face seems to shimmer faintly, as though breathing. This is not simply art. In Byzantium, such an icon was a window, a meeting place between the human and the divine, a silent prayer in paint and wood. For centuries, icons filled churches, palaces, and homes across the empire. Painted on panels of wood, framed with precious metals, or formed from tiny coloured stones in mosaic, they depicted Christ, the Virgin Mary, saints, angels, and scenes from Scripture. They were venerated, kissed, sensed, wept before. To the faithful, they were not mere representations, but carriers of presence, holy vessels of unseen truth. One did not look at an icon, one looked through it, into the eternal. But by the early 8th century, this deep devotion began to spark questions, and those questions gave way to conflict. The empire was facing military defeats and religious tension. Some began to wonder if the use of images had drawn divine wrath. How could one depict God? Was it proper to create visible forms of the invisible? Could human hands shape what was sacred? Thus began the iconoclast controversy, a period of turbulence that would last more than a century. Emperors, fearing idolatry and seeking unity, issued decrees that icons were to be removed, images were painted over, mosaics chipped away, frescoes scraped into silence. In churches once filled with golden halos and radiant saints, blank walls remained. The faces were gone, the stories quieted. Many obeyed, others resisted. Monks especially clung to the icons. To them, the image was part of the incarnation. If Christ had truly taken on flesh, then his image could be depicted. They preached, protested, and in many cases suffered. Some were imprisoned, others tortured, a few paid with their lives. Families divided over the issue, communities split. The very heart of Byzantine faith trembled. The debate reached deep into theology and philosophy. Could the divine be portrayed without diminishing it? Was the act of creating sacred art an act of devotion or of arrogance? The answers were never simple. Each side quoted scripture, called on tradition, and claimed divine favour. The empire, already burdened by enemies and internal strife, now found itself torn from within, not over gold or power, but over paint and belief. And yet, through all the turmoil, the icons never fully vanished. Some were hidden behind wooden panels or buried beneath floorboards. In distant monasteries and remote chapels, they were guarded like treasure, relics of both faith and defiance. In secret, prayers were still whispered before them, candles lit in their honour. In 843, after decades of unrest, the veneration of icons was finally restored. The event is still remembered in the Orthodox Church as the triumph of orthodoxy. It was Empress Theodora, not to be confused with the wife of Justinian, who played a pivotal role. Acting as regent for her young son, she reversed the iconoclastic policies and reinstated the ancient practices. Churches were once again filled with radiant images, artists emerged from hiding, brushes dipped in egg tempera, and gold leaf returned to work. The saints came home to their walls, but the wounds lingered. The iconoclast controversy had not just erased images, it had left behind scars in the spiritual and social fabric of Byzantium. It reminded the empire that ideas, like armies, could conquer and destroy. That belief, so central to Byzantine identity, could also divide. It had revealed the fragile balance between devotion and doctrine, between reverence and reason. Yet in the wake of this trauma, Byzantine art entered a golden age. The icons that followed were more refined, more profound. They captured not just beauty, but mystery. Faces became more elongated, eyes deeper, colors more symbolic. Icons were no longer just objects of veneration. They were survivors. Their presence in a church or home now carried a quiet story of exile and return, of destruction and healing. The theology surrounding them also deepened. The Orthodox understanding came to view icons as part of the incarnation itself. Just as God became visible in Christ, so too could the divine be reflected, carefully, reverently, in painted form. An icon was not worshipped, but honoured, as one might honour the shadow of a beloved, or the echo of a voice long cherished. Even in diplomacy, icons held power. They were gifted to foreign courts, sent as tokens of faith and goodwill. When ambassadors entered Constantinople, they passed beneath mosaics of emperors and saints, reminders that they stood in a city where the spiritual and political were entwined. Now, as twilight descends once more and the chapel grows darker, the icon before you glows faintly in the candlelight. Its face is calm, its eyes are watchful. In the hush, you feel a presence, not loud or overwhelming, but gentle and patient. This is Byzantium at prayer, at peace, and at its most enduring. Not in armies or monuments, but in the quiet conviction that the sacred can be seen, touched, and honoured, even in the simplest image. In the stillness, you understand. The empire was not built only with stone or gold, but with faith, and through its icons, solemn, luminous, and ever watchful, Byzantium still gazes back at us, serene and eternal. The wind whispers cold across the stones of the ancient ramparts. Along the city walls of Constantinople, sentries stand watch, their cloaks wrapped tightly against the sea breeze. Below, the waters of the Bosporus shimmer in the moonlight, calm and unknowing. Yet, beyond the horizon, in every century, there are always shadows gathering. For 1,000 years, Constantinople stood not just as a city, but as a sentinel, a fortress at the edge of empire, guarding the last light of Rome against a world in flux. From the moment of its rebirth under Constantine, the city became a beacon, rich, fortified, and endlessly coveted. Armies came like tides, rising and crashing against its mighty walls. Persians, Avars, Arabs, Bulgars, Rus, Crusaders, each drawn by the wealth of the city, each dreaming of conquest. But the city did not fall, not easily, not quickly. Its defences were unmatched, its resilience legendary. The cornerstone of that defence was the Theodosian walls. Constructed in the 5th century, they stretched over 4 miles, encasing the land side of the city in a triple ring of stone and towers. The outer wall was a formidable barrier in its own right, but behind it lay a deeper wall, taller, thicker, lined with bastions and reinforced by a massive moat. These fortifications, constantly maintained and improved, became the envy of the medieval world. From the ramparts, defenders could watch vast armies assemble and know, with cautious confidence, that the city could endure. But bricks and mortar were not the only tools of survival. The Byzantines wielded strategy with the precision of artisans. Diplomacy was an art, and Constantinople mastered it. Treaties were crafted with gold and promises, and when needed, broken with equal grace. Allies were courted, enemies divided, and threats redirected like water around stone. But when diplomacy failed, the empire turned to something even more fearsome: Greek fire. This mysterious weapon, hurled from bronze tubes aboard Byzantine ships, struck terror into the hearts of enemy fleets. It clung to wood, spread across water, and could not be extinguished by conventional means. Its formula was a closely guarded state secret, known only to a select few within the imperial court. Greek fire saved the city time and again, not just as a weapon, but as a symbol of divine protection. When flaming torrents surged across the sea, the Byzantines believed that heaven itself fought beside them. One of the earliest and most daunting tests came in the 7th century, when Arab forces sought to conquer the city and claim it as the jewel of a growing caliphate. In 2 massive sieges, first from 674 to 678, and then again in 717, the Umayyad armies launched relentless assaults. Massive fleets blocked the harbours, siege engines battered the walls, but inside the city, the people endured. Supplies were rationed, prayers offered day and night, and the walls, weathered yet strong, held fast. Greek fire swept through enemy ships, cutting through the darkness like dragon's breath. In the end, the Arabs withdrew, battered by both man and nature. Later came the Bulgars and the Rus, charging from the north with dreams of glory. The Rus, fierce warriors from the river lands of modern-day Russia and Ukraine, launched raids that struck terror through the countryside. In 860, their longships approached the city itself, but once again, the defences held, and even when the enemy reached the gates, the Byzantines had a weapon greater still: time. They knew how to endure. Perhaps the most painful assault came not from foreign lands, but from fellow Christians. In 1204, during the Fourth Crusade, Latin crusaders turned their ambitions not toward the Holy Land, but toward Constantinople itself. Driven by debt, greed, and political intrigue, they breached the city's walls and unleashed a wave of destruction rarely matched in its long history. Churches were looted, relics stolen, the great libraries were ransacked, statues and icons were melted down for coin. The city burned. Citizens were slaughtered in the streets, and the sanctity of sacred places was defiled. For the first time in centuries, the city fell. The Latin Empire, a short-lived puppet state, took hold of Constantinople. The once glorious capital became a hollow echo of itself. For nearly 60 years, the city languished under foreign rule. Its palaces crumbled, its people mourned. Yet even in this twilight, the flame of Byzantium flickered on. In 1261, the Byzantines reclaimed their city. Michael VIII Palaiologos, leading a resurgence from the Empire of Nicaea, entered Constantinople through a hidden gate and restored Byzantine rule. The return was triumphant, but the scars were deep. The city, though still proud, was no longer what it had once been. Its population was diminished, its economy weakened. Yet still it stood, not as a mirror of past grandeur, but as a symbol of survival. In the decades that followed, the threats continued. The rising power of the Ottoman Turks began to encircle the empire. One by one, Byzantine territories fell. The city became an island in a sea of encroaching power. Yet Constantinople did not surrender. Even as supplies dwindled, as allies hesitated, as hope wore thin, The people of the city walked its streets with the quiet strength of those who had known hardship before. And now, as night deepens and the sea laps softly against the harbour stones, you might imagine the flicker of torches along the walls. The scent of oil and iron hangs in the air. Somewhere, a soldier sharpens his sword. Another kneels in silent prayer before an icon. The stars wheel slowly overhead, the same stars that once watched as emperors were crowned and enemies repelled. Constantinople, the fortress of the ages, still breathes. It has withstood siege and fire, betrayal and loss. Not just with weapons, but with faith. Not just with walls, but with will. And through it all, it whispers its enduring truth, that glory is not in conquest, but in endurance. In the patient, unwavering strength to remain when all else has fallen. The sky was heavy with smoke, a low grey ceiling that dulled the morning sun and cloaked the city in shadow. The scent of fire drifted over the Bosporus, mingling with the sharp tang of gunpowder and the salt of the sea. It was May 29th, 1453. After more than 1,000 years, the city that had withstood armies, storms, and centuries of change now stood on the brink. Constantinople, the queen of cities, was about to fall. For 53 days, the siege had pressed in. The Ottoman Sultan, Mehmed II, just 21 years old, but ambitious beyond his years, had assembled an army of nearly 100,000 men. They came with cannons the size of towers, massive bronze monsters capable of shaking the earth with every shot. Opposing them stood the last remnants of Byzantium, fewer than 10,000 soldiers, including foreign mercenaries and citizen volunteers, stretched thin across miles of ancient walls. Inside the city, hope clung like dew. Emperor Constantine the 11th Palaiologos walked the battlements each day, speaking to his men, praying in the chapels, and refusing all offers to flee. The people looked to him not just as a ruler, but as a final embodiment of everything their empire had stood for. Churches were filled with candlelight and quiet voices. Icons were kissed, streets were fortified with makeshift barricades, and the harbour sealed with chains, all in the hope that one last miracle might come. Night and day, the city trembled under the thunder of cannon fire. The walls that had resisted centuries of assault cracked beneath the Ottoman bombardment. Dust and stone rained from their towers. At the gate of St. Romanus, a wide breach slowly widened with each passing day. The defenders patched and braced what they could, but the pressure was relentless. As dawn approached on that final day, a strange quiet fell over the city. Birds circled in the smoke-thick sky. In the Hagia Sophia, the faithful gathered one last time. Greeks and Latins, clergy and commoners, setting aside old divisions in the face of looming catastrophe. Together, they lit candles and sang hymns that rose into the dome like incense. Some wept, others simply sat in silence, hands folded, listening to the breath of their city one last time. Then, just before first light, the final assault began. Ottoman janissaries surged through the breaches, pouring into the city with cries that echoed from the hills to the harbour. The defenders met them, blade to blade. The streets became rivers of smoke and flame. Buildings burned. Arrows flew. Somewhere in the chaos, Constantine the 11th is said to have cast off his imperial robes and fought as a common soldier, vanishing into legend. His body was never found. The Ottomans moved swiftly. The Hagia Sophia, where prayers had only just ceased, was seized and converted into a mosque. Its golden mosaics, so long protected, were plastered over. Its soaring dome, once a beacon of Christian majesty, now echoed with the prayers of Islam. Survivors were enslaved or killed, homes looted, treasures taken. The Byzantium that had once ruled the Mediterranean, that had preserved the wisdom of antiquity, that had birthed saints and emperors, was no more. And yet, in the ashes, something stirred. The fall of Constantinople marked not only the end of an empire, but the beginning of a new world. Many of the city's surviving scholars, scribes, and thinkers fled west, carrying with them priceless manuscripts, ancient philosophies, and the flame of Hellenic knowledge. These refugees found welcome in Italy, where their teachings would help ignite a movement already beginning to flicker, the Renaissance. Byzantine art, theology, and architecture left lasting marks on both East and West. The onion domes of Russia, the mosaics of Ravenna, the chants of Orthodox liturgy, all bore traces of Constantinople's touch. Even in its fall, the city inspired. Mehmed II, though a conqueror, recognized its greatness. He made it his capital, restored its broken walls, and invited people of many faiths to rebuild. In time, Constantinople would become Istanbul, a city reborn, not Roman, not Byzantine, but something entirely new. But the soul of the city, the memory of Byzantium, lingered. In the silence of forgotten chapels, in the pages of ancient books, in the dreams of distant lands. It became legend, the city that had stood alone, defiant and luminous, for over 1,000 years. Now, as twilight settles over the quiet ruins, you may find yourself walking through the shadows of history. Wildflowers bloom between broken stones. A faded column leans into the wind. In the distance, a call to prayer rises into the sky, echoing alongside the ghost of ancient hymns. The two worlds that once clashed now share the same space, folded gently into time. And though empires rise and fall, though names and banners change, something of Byzantium remains. In every attempt to unite faith and beauty, to elevate knowledge and wonder, to craft a civilization that gazes not only at the ground beneath its feet, but at the stars above, there you will find it. The city is gone. But it did not go quietly, and in the quiet, if you listen closely, you can still hear it, the echo of choirs, the ring of bells, the soft murmur of footsteps over stone. Constantinople, eternal in memory, still stands in the heart of those who remember. The empire is gone, but its spirit still breathes. It lingers not in battlements or banners, but in arches and shadows, in whispered prayers and forgotten books. The legacy of Byzantium, subtle, radiant, enduring, lives on in ways the eye might not always catch, but the soul gently senses. It is felt in the curve of a dome, in the shimmering glass of a mosaic, in the rhythm of chants carried softly through incense-laden air. It is a memory written not only in history, but in stone, ritual, and silence. You might see it in the skyline of Istanbul, where old and new intertwine, minarets rising beside ancient churches, domes curving above busy streets, ferry boats gliding across the same waters once patrolled by Byzantine ships. Beneath layers of empires, the old city remains. The Hagia Sophia, now neither church nor mosque alone, stands as a symbol of this convergence, its vast dome still holding the sky, its marble floors still echoing with the quiet steps of pilgrims and wanderers. Here, past and present breathe the same air, but Byzantium's echoes are not limited to Istanbul. They live in the Orthodox liturgies sung from Athens to Moscow, in the monasteries of Mount Athos, where monks rise before dawn to chant words unchanged for centuries. They flow through the veins of Russian architecture, with onion domes inspired by Byzantine forms, and in the gilded icons that line the walls of chapels from Serbia to Ethiopia. Its law, too, left an imprint. The Justinian Code, compiled in the 6th century, became the foundation for legal systems across Europe. It helped shape the concept of justice, the structure of courts, the very language of governance. Byzantium, in refining Roman law, handed the torch forward, quietly, profoundly, and without fanfare. And in art, it achieved something singular. The Byzantines did not seek realism in the way the Renaissance would later celebrate. They sought transcendence. Their icons, flat and stylized, did not depict the world as it appeared, but as it might be glimpsed through the lens of eternity. Their mosaics shimmered not with illusion, but with truth. They captured holiness in the tilt of a head, the light in an eye, the gold of a background that seemed to exist outside of time. These images were not decorations. They were meditations, prayers in pigment and glass. Byzantine scholars preserved the knowledge of antiquity through centuries of turmoil. In libraries and scriptoria, they copied the works of Plato, Aristotle, Hippocrates, and Euclid. While much of the Western world slipped into intellectual darkness after Rome's fall, Byzantium kept the flame alive, not for conquest or glory, but because knowledge mattered, because wisdom was worth saving. These texts would later find their way to Italy, sparking the Renaissance, breathing new life into the human spirit. In this quiet way, Byzantium changed the course of history. And there was something else, something less tangible, but no less real, a worldview. Byzantium believed that heaven and earth were not separate realms, but interwoven. That beauty was a path to truth, that the divine could be glimpsed in song, in silence, in stone. This way of seeing the world did not fade with the empire. It lives on in the way candles are lit in Orthodox churches, in the slow pacing of liturgical time, in the hush that falls when a sacred story begins. Byzantium was not always peaceful nor perfect. It was an empire, with all the burdens and contradictions that word carries. There were wars and politics and ambition. There were failures and betrayals, but across the centuries, through storms and sieges, through plague and fire, it nurtured something enduring. It stood as a guardian between two worlds, between the classical past and the medieval future, between East and West, between the temporal and the eternal. Now, as our journey comes to an end, let us return once more to the city as night begins to fall. The sky turns lavender above the sea, and the domes catch the last golden light of day. From a distant chapel, a bell tolls, low and slow, its sound rolling gently over tiled rooftops and shadowed courtyards. Along the old stone walls, vines climb where soldiers once stood. Wildflowers bloom where emperors once walked. The city is quieter now, but not silent. You wander through the ruins of a monastery garden where carved capitals lie half buried among the grass. A breeze stirs the leaves of an olive tree, and somewhere nearby, water trickles softly from a broken fountain. There is no urgency here, no crowds, only the stillness of a place that remembers, a place where time has softened and the past lies just beneath the surface. You pause by a worn mosaic, half hidden by dust and vines. Though the colours are faded, the image remains, a saint with solemn eyes, looking out across the centuries. You imagine the artist who placed each piece, the prayers whispered with every stone, the silence that followed when it was complete. This is Byzantium, not gone, but sleeping, waiting to be noticed, waiting to be remembered. Its story is one of endurance, not of dominance or explosion, but of continuity, a quiet thread that runs through time, binding the ancient world to our own. It teaches us that beauty can endure hardship, that wisdom can survive collapse, that faith, when carried gently, can illuminate even the darkest hours. And so, as the stars emerge one by one above the city's ancient skyline, know that Byzantium still lives. In memory, in marble, in music, in the spaces between words, in the hush of sacred places, in the quiet certainty that some things, though broken, never truly disappear. If this journey brought you peace or stirred your curiosity gently awake, please consider liking this video or subscribing for more quiet wanderings through history. Your presence here makes these stories live again. Wherever you are, thank you for listening, and until next time, sleep well.